Hey guys, Tab here with Real Michigan Anglers, and in this video I'm going to do a rig rundown for float fishing for steelhead, specifically in low water, because this whole season's been a low water season. We haven't been getting rain or snow, everything's low, and that's making fishing a lot harder. So I'm adapting and doing things a little differently than I normally do this year, and I'm going to show you guys my rig and what I've been doing. We're going to do the whole thing beginning to end on screen so you can see what's going on if you're new to rigging for float fishing. First thing you want to do is get your main line. I've got my bait casting rod here that I'm setting this up on, and you want to get your rubber tubing that goes with your fixed floats. These come with the floats usually when you buy them. You can also buy extra in various lengths. I'm going to go with a 7-gram float here because we're talking about low water fishing. I personally tend to err on the side of running larger floats, but we'll start with the 7 for example. So I've got the tubing on there, I fed the bobber onto the tubing, and I have a little bit of my main line hanging out below there. So from here I'm going to tie on a swivel, and normally I would put my shot here, but in this case I'm going to be running a bumper line, which is part of the rig change up for the low water situation. So this main line here is 12-pound main line. My other my center pin rod is set up with 20 something, 27 I think, but it's 17-pound diameter. So I'm running between 12 and 20 as a main line usually, and that is monofilament main line. You want the monofilament because it's stretchy and it floats. So you want it to float so that when your bobber's in the water, this stuff that hangs off when it's laying in the water, it's going to float. If you have fluorocarbon line or braid on, the current's going to drag that under, and your bobber's always going to want to do this unless you're flawless with your mending. So monofilament is great for that reason, and also it's stretchier. You can feel it when you grab it and pull on it. It's a little stretchier, and that stretch will help absorb the shock of a steelhead thrashing on the other end of your rig. So that's my main line. Like I said, I've got 12-pound. This is P-line CFX, I believe, is what I have on here. So we're running a bumper. I'm going to run a 10-pound fluorocarbon bumper. Okay. The idea with the fluorocarbon is it's invisible underwater, supposedly, or at least mostly, and this is going to be less likely to spook the fish than this line here. They're going to see this line, and although I will often run my shot patterns right here when the water is higher because it doesn't really matter as much, with the low water we want to be a little more stealthy. So I'm going to take, I'm going to do 1.5 feet, 2 feet, somewhere in there, at least to start. I'm going to cut that, and then I'm going to attach this to my swivel. You can use whatever knot you like. The polymer knot is one of the strongest knots out there, and as a hardcore lure fisherman who fishes a lot of braided line, the polymer knot is my go-to. So that's the knot that I'm the most comfortable with tying quickly. Okay, there's that. Trim off my tag here. So I wasted a few inches tying that knot, because if you don't pull from the tag end, it frays your knot and messes things up. I might do a video on the polymer knot one of these days. There's some nuances to that. Otherwise it's a pretty simple knot. So now I've got a leader, yay long. We're still a little over a foot here. Okay, now what I'm going to do is take another swivel, and I'm going to attach this to the other end of my 10-pound shot line. here's the polymer knot for you. You put the line through and back through the other side so that it creates this loop. Then you take that and you create a loop with your other hand and feed the loop through the loop. Grab that loop, and then the last step is to take your swivel or your lure if you're tying on like a spinner or something, and you feed it through the loop. Grab the other side and then pull your tag end tight, and your main line end kind of got to pull a little bit of both to get it going, and then you just tighten it up. A lot of times I'll just do this to make sure it's nice and tight, and then trim that tag off, and now we have a shot line. So this is my light fluorocarbon shot line, 10 pound. Now this is where I'm going to put my split shots. So a lot of times I like to do bulk shotting with stuff like this, or I've got these smaller ones in here. I've got them all in here. These kind of guys. So this kind of thing kind of reduces the number of components and makes things simpler, and also does a really good job of getting your bait all the way down. The problem with that type of rig is it's not the stealthiest thing out there. For our stealthy variation, I'm going to shot my line, and in this case I'm only going to use one size split. Well, that's not true. I'm going to mostly use one size split shot. So I always like to get one right, my goodness, right at the swivel. Start there. I'm just going to loosely crimp these down for now. I don't know where my pliers are anyway. So we've got put one there. And basically my goal here is to evenly space these out. So before I go too far with this is a 7-gram float, and these are 1.5 gram split shots. So if I want my 7-gram float to run properly in the water, I want to have approximately 7 grams. Slightly less is okay, slightly more is going to cause some issues pretty quickly. So I'm keeping track. These are 1.5, so there I've put on 3. 2 split shots, 3 grams total. 2 more is another 3, that's 6 grams. So 6 grams, if I put another one on, I'm going to be 0.5 grams over. So here's where I'm going to break out some smaller shot. I believe that is a 0.5 gram. I'm not 100% sure, but I can kind of eyeball it. What else do I have? I have these. Those are slightly smaller. So they come in all sorts of ranges of sizes. I even have little micros. Little itty bitty guys. I hate these things because they're so hard to put on the line. But sometimes that can make a big difference. So I'm just going to take one of these guys and put it down at the end of my swivel on my shot line. Okay, so there you can see it's not quite evenly spaced out, so I'm just going to kind of readjust that. This one needs to move down. This one needs to move down. That's a little better. Get this one down. And there we are. Oh, that one came off because I didn't actually tighten them down yet. So I've got to tighten these down with pliers before I go throwing it in the river. But I've got to find those real quick. So now I have my bobber with my main line attached to a swivel, attached to my shot line, which is now shotted properly with the right amount of weight. I could probably throw one more of these on if I needed to. So after I make some drifts, I might decide, yeah, I want a little more weight, and I'll probably put this little guy down here and maybe just respace that a little bit. Or I might end up putting that on my leader line. So let's talk leader line. My second swivel is where I'm attaching my leader line, and for leader line I'm going to use the 8-pound. So I went for 10-pound for my shot line, a little heavier, so that if I do have a break off, it breaks off here, and I don't have to re-rig all of this, because as you can see, this is kind of a time-consuming process. The more you do it, the easier and quicker it gets, but if you're steelhead fishing in the winter like I am right now, you don't want to be on the side of the river freezing with gloves off trying to re-rig this stuff. Alright, so here I'm taking my hook. This is a Blood Run Skeena. These are the size 2. This is a size 4. I'm going to use a size 4 because I'm going to run a 10 mil bead on this rig. 8 wraps. I'm doing a egg loop knot here. So I just fed my line through and wrapped around 8 times. And now I'm going to go back through the eyelet the opposite direction. Lay that line that I just fed through there across the shank. Then I'm just doing 4 more wraps in the same direction that I was before with the other part. I didn't show that so thoroughly, but this is an egg loop knot. So the advantage of the egg loop knot, and you can see it right there, is the way that it sits on the line. So when your line is dangling down, that hook is pointing straight up. This is very important. I used to fish by tying a polymer knot to my hook, and I was losing a lot of fish, and kind of started thinking about that and talking to some people, and after switching to using a Snell or an egg loop knot, that problem really went away. My hookup ratios got way better. So that's an important factor. You're going to want that line to hug the shank of the hook so that it dangles exactly. Now you have the added benefit with the egg loop, which is why I just always tie an egg loop, is you can open that up and cinch some bait in there. So I can take a hunk of skein, I got some right here. This is some bad looking skein that I need to throw at some fish sometime soon before it goes bad. But you can put a hunk in there and cinch that up, and it's just going to sit right on there. And you can throw a wax worm on there or some other random things. You can spice up your presentation by throwing a little yarn on that to give it a little secondary flash, so they might hone in on the big bead, but then you know, the extra color or whatever could be useful. So there I've got my leader. It's a 1.5 foot. It's kind of standard. You can run a 2 foot or a 4 foot leader, and in some cases that can be very beneficial. So here I'm going to attach my hook. Oh, I can't do that yet. I always want to do things too soon. So I've got to put my bead on before I can attach my line here. So let's grab a bead. I'm going to just go with the old tallywhacker. It's the one that I had Bloop design for me that ended up being a slayer, so it got put into production. And I've got that fed onto my line now, and I'm going to take my bead peg. This is one of the new Nova bead pegs from Nova Tackle. These ones are glow in the dark, which is super cool. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that in the spring and next fall, and for scams at night, just to get a little glow on that bead. That's going to be awesome. So I've got it pegged on there. I want to put it near where I want it so I can really lock it in. I'm going to slide that just a little closer to the hook. I used to run quite a bit further out, but I'm kind of liking somewhere in there now. Maybe there. It's the sweet spot. And I'm just going to cinch this down nice and tight. You can see that stretching. You can feel the resistance. You know it's pegged on there good. What you don't want is that bead to be able to slide around on you, because then every cast when you reel in you have to slide it back where you want it, and then that gets really annoying real fast. So I always get those on there nice and tight, trim off the tag ends, and there we have the bead on the leader line. So now I can attach my leader line to the swivel at the end of my shot line. And speaking of shot lines, you can do all sorts of different types of shot lines. I like to keep it simple with one size. It's just easier. You can do the tapered shot, especially in smaller water and things like that. But I typically stay away from the tapered shot because it makes the math more complicated when you're trying to properly weight your bobber. And it's a lot more shot to put on because you're putting on smaller shot for the taper. All of that. So again, here I'm using the polymer knot. I made my loop. Now I've got to feed my leader through that loop. And this is a weird, cumbersome, strange thing to do if you're not used to doing this. I don't recommend attaching your leader with a polymer knot if you're not already using the polymer knot a lot. Pull from the tag end. There it is. So, just a good old fisherman's knot, cinch knot. That stuff usually works real good, but with steelhead I'm so wary of knots breaking, line breaking, so I really like to stick with that polymer knot. And I know confidently I can really put it to them without worrying about this knot or this knot up here or the knot on top of that. It's almost never that knot, but sometimes you do break the whole thing off when you get into some logs and stuff. So there it is. That's my whole thing. So I've got my hook, size 4 to go with my 10 mil bead. If you're going to use a 12 mil, that's where the size 2 is the preference. And then I've got that much leader line by after cutting my tag ends. It's a foot. And generally what I do if I decide that this short leader is just too short for what I'm fishing, I can retie on a longer leader, or a lot of times I'll just tie up a second leader and tie that leader directly to this hook, which makes my overall leader a lot longer, with the added benefit of having two different colors to choose from, or maybe the same color but in two different sizes if you're trying to hone in on what size they're going for, that kind of thing. You can play with all of the details of this. Your leader can be anywhere from a foot to 3 or 4 feet. Your shot line can be anywhere from 6 inches to 4 feet if you're fishing really deep water. I'm knocking my split shot off and around. So mine was like 1.5 foot here. And then your main line. So if you know the depth of the water, if you happen to know, or you manage to gauge a good approximation, what you want to do is set your float to your leader line. That last split shot, you want that to be approximately the depth of the water, a little lower, so that your leader line can dangle down below that. If you're running really fast water, then you need to hug tighter to the bottom, and that's where I start to bulk my shot differently. So if I've got this rig and it's just not quite working out for me, I feel like I'm not getting it where I need it, a lot of times I'll just take these last couple split shots and slide them all the way down so that I have more weight concentrated at the bottom. And I always like to keep a couple of them, this is all twisty, closer to the top. So I might slide this one up when I do that, keeping one in the middle. And then this whole thing can move up or down as much as possible. Now I'm set to fish 3 or 4 feet there. I can make it longer. You can't really go longer than your rod, otherwise you won't be able to cast. I'm fishing an 11.5 foot rod, so I can fish like 11 feet deep with a fixed float. If I need to go deeper, that's where I switch out to a slip float rig, where you have a bobber stop that you use to set your depth, and then your bobber slides up and down, so you can actually reel this through your eyelets so that you can make casting a lot easier for deep fishing. Okay, but that's the opposite of what we got going on this year with all this low water. So that's that. One other thing I'll talk about is if you decide that your 7 gram is too small, say you can't cast far enough because you don't have enough weight on the rig, or your bobber's just getting like pulled out of the current too much, then you're gonna want to switch to a bigger, more stable bobber. So I'm switching out my 7 gram here for a 10.5 gram. One of the things I love about the Nova floats is they're labeled on there 3/8 ounce and 10.5 grams. So you don't have to do the math, you can just know. So if your split shot are measured in grams like these ones are, I need 10.5 grams of split shot. If your split shot are measured in ounces, then you can do the math to add up to 3/8 of an ounce. So I love it when companies label their floats and their split shot with both grams and ounces. It just makes everything easier. I wish that was the standard, but it's not. It makes it confusing for fishermen that are trying to figure out what to do. All I have to do now is take my little rubber tubings and slide the bigger bobber on. And there it is. I can still adjust that up and down as necessary, but now I need more weight on my shot line. So if I'm fishing really shallow, I'm going to pull this all the way down to the swivel. And if you make your shot line way too long on accident, and then realize that you did that, you can slide these shots down, pull your bobber off, and feed that bobber over your micro swivel. Can be a little tricky. It's tight. Now my stop is below. If you do that with both of them, then you can peg your bobber here, which may increase your chances of losing a bobber, but if you don't want to re-rig, then you can go that route. I'm just going to slide that back, because I made a nice really short shot line, like 1.5 feet, so that's not, if you're fishing 1.5 feet water, then you probably just floss and fish off gravel, so that's not excessive by any means. So now I've got a 10.5 gram bobber, and I've got 7 grams on, so I need a couple more grams. We need to go 7, this would give me 8.5, this would give me 10. So that works out pretty good. That puts me just under. So if I decide I need to add some shot, I can. If I'm fishing really deep, I might just go ahead and slide this up to where it's going to be and add these next couple here. Sometimes I'll do that because it's nice to have split shot right below your bobber. If I'm staying closer to this shallower depth, then I'll just keep adding these to my shot line. But it doesn't hurt to have some on your main line. You can't do that if you're doing a slip float rig, but you can when you're doing a fixed float rig. And generally what I'm gonna do if I add 2, I'm gonna add them close together near the bobber. And if you're getting issues with tangling, you can kind of rearrange those, get them closer together or further apart. Now I can slide this one back up, and I am now re-weighted for that bobber just by adding those 2 split shot. And then if I change again and decide to go bigger, I just add more. If I decide to go back down, I've got sizes in between these two, so you got options. So say you got all of this going and you're fishing and you just feel like you're not quite getting bottom, you're not getting things down to where you want them because you don't have a ton of weight on here. We're still weighted 0.5 grams below what this is rated for. So if I want to do another 5 gram or a slightly smaller, usually what I'll do is if I'm going to put one on the leader, I'll go with one of these itty bitty guys. So I'll just take this little itty bitty guy and see if I can even get him on here. But about halfway, yeah, not without my pliers. And that's why I don't use these tiny little guys most of the time. But I can put that somewhere 1/2 to 3/4 of the way towards the swivel, just to get that line dropping down a little bit more. Sometimes if the current's heavy, it'll just kind of cause that semi-buoyant bead to ride up a bit. So sometimes it doesn't hurt to put one on your leader. Or you can slide up this bigger one and add another small one down here. And that's that. So that's fixed float fishing with a bumper line. To sum up the important things here, you've got a heavier main line, a lighter shot line, and then an even lighter leader line. So I'm going 12 pound to 10 pound to 8 pound throughout the rig. That's keeping everything nice and stealthy without sacrificing the strength of my rig, so that I can still give it to the fish. If they start taking off and going into logs and stuff, I can horse them fairly well with my 8 pound leader being the weakest link. I don't really like fishing 6. If it's ultra low, ultra clear conditions, I will use 6, but if there's log jams around, there's no point. So I go with 8 generally. If I think I can get away with it, I like running 10. So when I'm running 10, I feel like I can just give it to that fish hard and own him, crank him in without worrying too much about him getting away, as long as I play things properly. So that's that. Whether you're using the same brand stuff or not, as long as you have all of these components, you can make this rig work, and this is a good rig for these clear water, low water fishing conditions. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope you found that informative and fun. I hope that you can put this to use to catch yourself some fish out on the river. As usual, thank you for watching. Alright, thanks a lot. I'll catch you guys on the flip side.